The wind moved across the old mountain like a long exhale from the earth itself, a breath released after centuries of holding on. In that ancient stillness stood a young man named Rayan, carrying a mind louder than the storm that followed him everywhere. He had traveled far, farther than he ever imagined he would, because every path he walked in his life led him deeper into a maze of his own thoughts. His head was a battlefield of past regrets, future anxieties, noise, doubt, and endless questions that scratched at him day and night. It had gotten to a point where silence itself frightened him, because silence meant meeting himself without distractions. That fear, more than anything, pushed him to climb this mountain. He had heard whispers, legends more than facts, about an old hermit who lived at its peak, a man said to possess the rare ability to teach the art of emptying the mind. Some said he was a mystic, others swore he was a ghost. A few believed he was just a wanderer who had found the peace the rest of the world was starving for. And Rayan, desperate and exhausted, needed that peace more than he needed air. Climbing took hours. His breath fractured. His thoughts didn't. They only grew louder. Memories of failures, echoes of people who doubted him, the endless pressure to become someone impressive, someone important, someone worthy. The mountain felt like it was measuring his soul, testing whether he deserved to meet the hermit at all. Every step demanded honesty. Every rock beneath his feet confronted him with the weight he carried inside. As he reached the final ledge of the peak, he found a tiny hut shaped from stone and silence. Smoke rose gently from its chimney like the quiet pulse of a world untouched by chaos. He approached it slowly, as if any sudden movement would break the serenity surrounding it. Before he could knock, the door opened on its own. Not from magic, from timing. Perfect timing. An old man stood there, gray hair pouring like soft snow onto his shoulders, eyes so clear they looked like mirrors of the sky. Nothing about him felt heavy. Not his presence, not his posture, not his gaze. He looked like a man who had placed his burdens exactly where they belonged, nowhere. "You climbed too fast," the old man said, his voice gentle enough to calm thunder. When the mind is full, the feet rush. Rayan didn't understand. He didn't have to. The old man stepped aside. "Come in. You didn't travel all this way to stand at the door." Inside the hut, every object seemed placed with intention. Nothing extra, nothing missing. A single bed, a small fire, a stone bowl with water clearer than memory. Ryan noticed the space was entirely free of clutter, not just physical but emotional. He could feel it. The room was a mind emptied. "I came for guidance," Rayan finally said. The old man studied him, not with curiosity but with awareness. "You came because you are drowning in yourself," Rayan swallowed. No one had ever said it so plainly. The old man motioned for him to sit. "Tell me what fills your mind." What followed wasn't a conversation. It was a release. Ryan poured out every thought he carried, the failures, the fears, the need to prove himself, the chaos of expectations, the restlessness that clung to his sleep, the constant chase for perfection, the voices in his mind that never allowed him to rest. The old man listened to every word without interruption, without judgment, without the hunger to reply. When Ryan finished, he felt lighter, though not enough. The old man finally spoke. "Your mind is like this bowl." He held up the stone bowl and filled it to the brim with water. "When it overflows, you suffer. Not because the world is unkind, but because you carry more than you can hold." He tilted the bowl just slightly, allowing water to spill onto the dirt floor. Emptying the mind does not mean removing all thoughts. It means removing the ones you cling to. The bowl can only serve when it has space to receive. And you, he pointed gently to Ryan's chest, have not left any space for life to enter. Ryan felt the words pierce deeper than any wisdom he had ever heard. His entire life, he thought the solution was to add more knowledge, more effort, more plans, more expectations. But he had never once thought of letting go. "Teach me," Ryan whispered, and so the teaching began. Every morning, the old man led him to a narrow cliff that overlooked a valley wider than imagination. Rayan was told to sit, breathe, observe, not the world but his own mind. Thoughts came like birds in migration, thousands at a time. Rayan chased them, judged them, fought them, tried to silence them. And every time the old man shook his head. "You don't empty the mind by force," he said. "You empty it by allowing it to be." Rayan struggled for days, maybe weeks. Time moved differently on the mountain, as if the clocks below had no authority here. At first all he felt was frustration, then discomfort, then exhaustion. But as he continued, something subtle began to happen. A breath would pass, a moment would soften, a thought would arrive and leave without sticking. It wasn't silence, it was spaciousness. That spaciousness grew inside him, drop by drop, like water carving a riverbed. He found himself thinking less and experiencing more. He noticed the shape of the wind, the warmth of sunlight on stone, the rhythm of his own heartbeat, and most importantly, he noticed the difference between thinking and being consumed by thought. One evening, as the sky folded into colors no painter could capture, the old man spoke a truth that would change Rayan's life forever. "You came here believing emptiness is a loss," he said, "but emptiness is freedom. When your mind is empty, you respond to life instead of reacting. When your mind is empty, you see people as they are, not as your fears paint them. When your mind is empty, the world becomes wide enough for peace to enter." Rayan closed his eyes, and for the first time in his entire life, his mind was not silent. No, it was alive, open, spacious, free. The noise wasn't gone, it simply no longer owned him. That was the moment he understood the truth. An empty mind is not a mind without thoughts. It is a mind that is no longer a prisoner. Days later, when Rayan finally descended the mountain, he was not the same boy who climbed it. He carried less, but somehow he had more. His steps were slower but steadier. His eyes saw farther, not because the world had changed, but because he had. And as he reached the bottom, he realized the real reason people should listen to this story until the last second. Because every person, in their own way, is carrying a mind overflowing with noise. And every one of them deserves the freedom to finally empty it. The story of emptying your mind is not entertainment. It is a mirror, a map, a release, a path to a life you can actually breathe in. And for those who walk it, nothing is ever the same again. The wind danced across the jagged cliffs, like it was breathing, slow and deliberate, brushing against every stone and every tree with equal attention. At the top of that desolate mountain, a young man named Rayan stood staring at the horizon. Though he wasn't really seeing it, his mind was far too crowded for scenery. Memories, regrets, expectations, worries, doubts, they all twisted together in a tight knot that no sleep, no conversation, no distraction had ever managed to loosen. He carried with him the endless noise of life itself, a storm inside that drowned out any peace. He had traveled here because he had nowhere else to go. Every path he had chosen in his life, every decision he had made, seemed only to tighten the grip of the noise in his mind. Success hadn't silenced the chaos. Love hadn't quieted it. Even solitude seemed unable to offer the peace he craved. And so he climbed. The stories he had heard were vague, like whispers from another world. A hermit lived at the peak, they said, a man who had mastered the art of emptying the mind. Some called him a sage, some a ghost, some a fool, perhaps. But Rayan didn't care for labels. He needed freedom from himself more than anything else. The climb was brutal. Each step seemed to drag a ton of weight from his chest down to his knees. The air was thin, sharp, and biting. But the worst was not physical exhaustion, it was mental. Thoughts assaulted him from every direction, louder than the wind, refusing to let him forget himself. Every fear, every failure, every missed opportunity clawed at him like a predator. He tried to push them away, to focus on the path, but they followed him relentlessly, like shadows stretching across the mountain even in sunlight. Finally, after hours, or perhaps days, because time on the mountain felt irrelevant, he reached the summit. A small hut stood there, simple, humble, yet somehow radiating a presence of serenity he had never known. Smoke curled lazily from its chimney, rising into the sky like a soft whisper. Ryan hesitated at the door, his heart hammering as though the act of knocking could shatter everything within him. Before he could decide, the door opened. An old man stood there, his hair silver white, his face lined but calm, his eyes clear and piercing. His presence was quiet yet powerful, like a lake undisturbed by wind. There was no judgment in his gaze, no urgency, no expectation, just attention, patient and absolute. "You climb too fast," the old man said, his voice gentle, yet it carried the weight of truth. "When the mind is full, the feet rush." Rayan, taken aback, could only nod. Words failed him. The hermit stepped aside. "Come in. You didn't travel all this way to stand at the door." Inside, the hut was sparse, yet perfectly complete. A single bed, a small fire, a stone bowl with water so clear it reflected not only the ceiling but the thoughts of anyone who dared look too long. Every object, every space, seemed to exist with purpose, as though the world had been reduced to its essence. Rayan could feel the difference immediately. This place was not cluttered, and neither would it allow him to clutter it with his mental noise. "I came for guidance," Rayan finally whispered, though the words sounded fragile even to him. The old man studied him, not with curiosity but with awareness. "You came because you are drowning in yourself." Rayan swallowed. No one had ever said it so plainly. The hermit gestured to the stone bowl. "Your mind is like this bowl. When it overflows, you suffer. Not because the world is unkind, but because you carry more than you can hold." He tilted the bowl slightly, and water spilled onto the floor. Emptying the mind does not mean removing all thoughts. It means releasing the ones you clutch too tightly. The bowl can only serve when it has space to receive. "And you," he tapped Rayan's chest gently, "have not left any space for life to enter." Rayan felt something shift inside him, though he didn't yet understand it. The words were not instructions, they were revelations. Each morning the hermit led him to a cliff overlooking a vast valley that seemed endless. There, Rayan would sit, and for hours he would breathe, observe, and try not to interfere. But the mind, stubborn and restless, refused to listen. Thoughts arrived like waves, memories of failures, anxieties about the future, questions about purpose, the echo of every insult, every disappointment. And each time Rayan tried to control them, to chase them away. Each time the hermit shook his head. "You do not empty the mind by force," he said. "You empty it by letting it be, by letting the thoughts arrive and leave without interference. By becoming aware that they are not you, they do not define you, and they do not need to control you." The days turned into weeks, or perhaps months, time losing all meaning at that height. Rayan fell, struggled, fought, and often wanted to give up. But gradually he began to notice subtle changes. Breaths became deeper. Moments of clarity pierced the fog of his thoughts. A thought would arrive and leave without consuming him. A small smile would appear for no reason. A feeling of space would settle in his chest. The hermit's lessons were not complicated. They were simple, yet they required everything. Observation without judgment, awareness without attachment, presence without expectation. Each day, Rayan learned to watch the storm of his mind, to recognize it, and most importantly, to release it. One evening, as the sky turned molten with sunset, the hermit spoke a truth that would remain with Rayan forever. "You came believing emptiness is loss, but emptiness is freedom. When the mind is empty, you respond to life instead of reacting. When the mind is empty, you see the world as it is, not as your fears paint it. When the mind is empty, you exist fully, freely, and completely." Rayan closed his eyes and finally felt what he had been seeking all his life: spaciousness. Not silence, not nothing, but freedom. A space where life could breathe, where thought did not dominate, where he could simply be. In that moment he realized that the climb, the struggle of every thought, every fear, every restless night, it had all led him here. And now, for the first time he understood, the mind does not become lighter because the world changes. It becomes lighter because we let go. When Rayan descended the mountain, he carried less, yet he had more. Each step was deliberate, steady, alive. The world seemed brighter, yet he knew it hadn't changed. The difference was within him. And he understood why anyone who listens to this story must stay with it until the end. Because every person carries a mind overflowing with noise. And every person deserves the freedom to finally empty it. The lesson of an empty mind is not simply a story. It is a mirror, a map, and a release. For those willing to follow it, life becomes not a battle of thoughts, but a river flowing through the soul, calm, alive, infinite. The valley below stretched endlessly, its rivers winding like silver threads beneath the fading light. Rayan stood at the base of the mountain, the wind brushing his face with a gentleness that felt new. The world hadn't changed since he climbed that mountain, but his relationship to it had. Every sound felt clearer, every breath seemed deeper, every moment appeared more alive. But transformation is never truly complete the moment it begins. There are always tests. Life's way of ensuring that wisdom becomes muscle, that understanding becomes instinct, that clarity becomes a lived truth rather than a beautiful idea. Rayan soon learned that descending the mountain was not the end of his journey. It was the beginning of the test he didn't know he was preparing for. For 3 days after leaving the hermit's hut, he walked through forests, quiet villages, and lonely paths. With each step, he practiced what he had learned. When a memory rose, he let it pass. When fear whispered, he acknowledged it without sinking into it. When doubt tried to wrap its cold fingers around his heart, he saw it for what it was, a thought, nothing more. By the time he reached the foothills, he felt a sense of lightness he had never known. But peace, like any fragile thing, is challenged by the world. On the 4th day, as he approached a small village by the river, he heard shouting. Loud, panicked. Dozens of villagers were rushing toward the river with buckets, ropes, and tools. Children cried, adults shouted orders, and the sound of raging water shook the earth beneath their feet. Curiosity pushed Rayan forward. As he reached the riverbank, he saw the cause of the chaos. A young boy, no older than 10, was trapped on a rock in the middle of the river. The water had risen unusually fast after a sudden storm upstream. The current roared like an angry beast, swirling around the rock with force strong enough to break bone. The villagers were trying desperately to reach him, but no rope was long enough, no bridge close enough, no boat sturdy enough to withstand the current. The boy screamed, clinging to the slippery stone as the water surged around him. Rayan's heart pounded, not with panic, but with presence. A clarity washed over him, colder and sharper than the river's raging water. The villagers were paralyzed by fear, overwhelmed by the possibility of failure. Their minds were loud, overflowing, drowning in panic. He understood that state intimately. He had lived in that storm all his life. Without speaking, Rayan stepped forward. One of the villagers grabbed his arm. "What are you doing? The river will kill you." Rayan looked at the rushing water. His mind should have filled with fear. Thoughts of death, danger, regret. But instead, it was spacious, calm. A thought came and passed. Another whispered and dissolved. He was not empty. He was free. Rayan removed his shoes, tightened his clothes, and stepped toward the river. The villager shouted again, "You'll be swept away." Rayan shook his head gently, not in defiance, in clarity. "No," he said softly, "I will flow." He tied one end of a long rope around his waist and handed the other to the villagers. They hesitated, but something in Rayan's gaze, calm, unwavering, centered, convinced them. As he moved into the freezing water, the current slammed into him like a wall. It shoved him, dragged at him, tried to pull him off his feet. But Rayon did not resist. He didn't fight the current. He flowed with it, using its force instead of battling against it. He moved like a branch in a river, bending, gliding, adjusting. His breath remained steady. His mind remained spacious. He reached the boy's rock, fingers gripping the jagged edges as the water roared below. The boy cried out, terrified, but Rayon's presence was a calm in the storm, a steady center that anchored reality. He wrapped the rope around the boy, securing him tightly. "You'll be safe," he said softly. "Are we going to die?" The boy choked. Rayon touched the boy's forehead gently. "No, we are going to breathe." With a deep inhale, he signaled the villagers. They pulled. The current fought back, furious, thundering against them. But the villagers pulled harder, fueled by hope and fear and desperation. Rayon kept the boy steady as the rope tightened. The villagers hauled the child across the water, inch by inch, until he reached safety. Cheers erupted across the riverbank, but Rayon was still in the water. The moment the rope loosened from the boy, the current ripped Rayon from the rock. The water swallowed him whole, dragging him beneath the surface. The world above became a blur of bubbles and darkness. The weight of the water pressed against his chest. The current spun him, flipped him, slammed him into submerged stones. The river wanted to pull him under, to claim him. But in the swirling chaos, Rayon remembered the hermit's words, "When the mind is empty, you respond. When the mind is crowded, you drown." He let go, not of life, but of fear. He surrendered to the movement, letting the river guide him. Instead of fighting the water, he allowed it to carry him. Instead of resisting the force, he aligned with it. Slowly the current weakened, the river widened, the chaos softened, his lungs burned, but his mind stayed clear. When he finally surfaced, gasping, he found himself in a calmer part of the river downstream. He swam toward the bank and collapsed on the gravel, chest heaving, body trembling. But he was alive. A group of villagers ran toward him, shouting his name. They lifted him from the water, their faces flooded with relief and awe. "You saved the boy," one woman cried. "You moved like the river," another said. "How did you stay calm?" asked a third. Rayon looked at the trembling boy, safe in his mother's arms. He smiled, not with pride, but with understanding. "I didn't save him," Rayon said softly. "Clarity did." That night the villagers insisted he stay in their homes. They prepared food, wrapped him in blankets, listened as he told them about the mountain, the hermit, and the lesson he had learned. The next morning he continued his journey. But news travels fast in small places. By the time he reached the next village, people already knew his story. Some called him brave, some called him foolish, some called him enlightened. Some simply wanted to meet the man whose mind had become as wide as the sky. But Rayon shook his head whenever praise reached him. "I am no teacher," he said. "I am a student who finally started listening." Yet, without intending to, he became a guide. People came to him with fear, confusion, and pain. They asked how to silence their thoughts, how to calm their minds, how to find peace. And he said the same words the hermit once spoke. Emptying the mind is not removing thoughts. It is removing your attachment to them. He taught them to observe their thoughts without judgment, to breathe without force, to allow rather than resist, to respond rather than react. Rayon stayed in the villages for weeks, guiding those who sought him out. But there was one person he needed to return to, the hermit. So he climbed the mountain again. This time, the ascent felt different, not easy, just clearer. He moved without the weight of internal storms, without the pressure of mental noise, without the grip of endless thought. When he reached the hut, the old man was waiting at the door, as though he had known Rayon would return exactly at that moment. "You have seen the world through new eyes," the hermit said, smiling faintly. "Yes," Rayon replied, "and I came to thank you." The old man shook his head. "You came to understand." He motioned for Ryan to follow him to the cliff where they once sat in silence. The valley glowed beneath them, stretching endlessly, breathing with the wind. "You emptied your mind to find peace," the hermit said softly. "But the true purpose of an empty mind is not peace." Ryan frowned. "Then what is it for?" The hermit looked at the horizon. "To allow life to move through you." Ryan absorbed the words slowly, feeling them settle into the open spaces within him. "When the mind is empty," the hermit continued, "you move like water, you see like light, you hear like wind. You become fully alive. That is the meaning of freedom." Ryan closed his eyes and felt the truth resonate. "We empty the mind," the hermit said, "not to escape the world, but to return to it." For a long time they sat in silence, watching the valley breathe. Finally Ryan asked, "What do I do now?" The hermit smiled, eyes soft. "You live, you help, you walk, you stay present. And one day, when another lost soul climbs this mountain, looking for the same freedom you once sought," he placed his hand gently on Rayon's shoulder, "you will know how to guide them." Rayon exhaled, a long, deep breath that carried away the last remnants of his old self. He descended the mountain one last time, not as the boy who climbed it, not as the man who survived the river, but as someone who had finally understood. An empty mind is not a blank mind, it is a free one. And as he walked into the world, alive, aware, and open, he carried with him the truth that would inspire thousands. Your mind is not a prison, unless you hold the key from the inside. Rayon's steps on the worn mountain path were now measured, deliberate, yet light. The lessons he had learned, the clarity he had earned, gave his movement a grace he hadn't known before. The mountain itself seemed alive under his feet, every stone, every gust of wind, every whispering leaf reflecting his newfound awareness. Yet even with such progress, he understood that mastery over the mind was not a final destination. It was a continuous path, a lifelong conversation with oneself. Descending into the valley once more, Rayan observed the world in a new dimension. He noticed the way sunlight fractured through the branches, the way rivers curved as if dancing to a rhythm only nature could hear, the subtle shifts in people's expressions, the hesitation before a smile, the fleeting shadow of doubt in their eyes. Every detail, he realized, was part of the vast tapestry of existence, and to perceive it fully he had to remain empty, not void, but receptive. It was during this journey that Rian encountered Amara, a young woman seated alone on a stone bridge, her eyes fixed on the water flowing beneath. She radiated a quiet sorrow, a stillness that spoke louder than words. When Rayan approached, she did not look up. He sat beside her, respecting the silence that hung between them. "I've heard about you," she said after a long pause. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, yet carried the weight of unspoken suffering. "They say you've emptied your mind, that you can see clearly." Rayan smiled faintly. "I see what is, not what I wish it to be." Her lips trembled and tears traced slow paths down her cheeks. "I wish I could do that. I've tried. But every time I think I've let go, the thoughts return. They mock me, and I feel trapped." Rayan considered her words carefully. He remembered his own struggles, the relentless flood of thoughts, the panic, the weight of expectations, the invisible chains that tied him to himself. "It is not about fighting the thoughts," he said gently. "It is about not letting them own you. You can watch them, let them pass, and breathe in the spaces they leave behind." Amara looked at him, searching for meaning in his eyes. "But how do you do it when the world is so loud?" "The world is loud," Rayan acknowledged, "but noise is only power if you give it yours. Sit with it, feel it, recognize it, and then let it flow through. Do not clutch it. Do not chase it. The mind needs space, like a river needs banks to guide it, but not walls to trap it." For hours they sat in silence, observing the river. Rayan guided her breath, gently nudging her to notice the rhythm of the water, the rise and fall of her chest, the natural ebb of thought. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, her shoulders relaxed, her brow softened, and her breathing found its natural cadence. "This is just the beginning," Ryan whispered. "The mind is vast, like this river. Sometimes it rages, sometimes it flows calmly. But it is always moving. Learn to move with it, not against it." The next morning, Ryan and Amara journeyed together toward a small village at the valley's edge. Word of Ryan's teachings had spread, and people awaited him, curious and eager, yet burdened with their own mental storms. They came with questions, fears, and anxieties. Some wanted relief, some wanted answers, some simply wanted to feel the calm that radiated from a mind uncluttered. Ryan began teaching them, not as a master, but as a fellow traveler. His lessons were practical yet profound. Observe without judgment. Do not react to every thought. Release attachment. Understand that thoughts and fears are not your identity. Breathe and be present. Ground yourself in the now, where life unfolds. Flow with circumstances. Do not resist what cannot be changed. Adapt and respond. He guided villagers through exercises of silence, breathing, and mindfulness. Slowly the transformation was visible. Faces softened, shoulders dropped, hearts seemed lighter, children laughed more freely, adults spoke with calmness. Even the elderly found a moment of clarity they had long forgotten. Yet Ryan understood that real transformation required challenge, as life often tests the strength of lessons learned. And so the mountain, in its silent wisdom, prepared his next trial. One evening, a messenger arrived with news. A wildfire was sweeping across a distant hillside, threatening a nearby village. Panic had gripped the people, and chaos reigned. Ryan felt the familiar stirrings of fear, but this time it was different. Instead of succumbing to panic, he breathed. Instead of reacting with haste, he observed. He organized the villagers with calm efficiency, guiding them to evacuate safely, to create fire breaks, to protect what they could without clinging to what they could not. He moved like water, adaptable, flexible, and serene. The fire raged, yet the destruction was minimized because he taught them not to act from fear, but from clarity. During the ordeal, Amara remained by his side, learning that courage is born not from fearlessness, but from presence. Together, they guided people through panic and chaos, and Ryan realized that the true purpose of an empty mind is not for oneself. It is to serve, to be fully present for others, to act from clarity rather than compulsion. After the fire subsided, the villagers celebrated survival and resilience. But Ryan did not linger in praise. He knew the mountain awaited him once more. There were still lessons to learn, still depths to explore, still spaces of the mind to open. As he climbed the familiar path to the hermit's hut, he reflected on the journey so far. He had saved a child, guided villagers, calmed a troubled mind, and learned to move through chaos without being consumed. And yet, he knew there was more. For emptying the mind is not a single act. It is a lifelong practice, a river that flows endlessly, carving new paths through the landscape of one's consciousness. Upon reaching the peak, he found the hermit waiting, seated by the cliff as always. The wind whispered softly, carrying the scent of pine and stone, and the horizon glowed with the first light of dawn. "You have returned," the hermit said, his voice calm and knowing. "I have learned," Ryan replied. "I have guided, I have observed, I have let go. But I feel there is still more to understand." The hermit smiled faintly. "There always is. The mind is vast and the world is infinite. But you have grasped the essence. True mastery is not about control, it is about presence. Not about having the mind empty at all times, but about returning to emptiness whenever the storm rises." Ryan closed his eyes, feeling the truth settle into the deepest spaces of his consciousness. He remembered the river, the fire, the villagers, Amara, the mountain, the riverbank. He realized that life itself is a constant test, a swirling current of challenges, fears, desires, and noise. And the only way to navigate it fully is through awareness, clarity, and the courage to let go. The hermit placed a hand on Rayon's shoulder. Now you go back into the world. Teach not by words, but by presence. Show others the freedom of an empty mind through the way you live, the way you breathe, the way you respond to life itself. Rayan descended the mountain once more, this time not as a seeker, not as a student, but as a guide in his own right. With every step, he felt a profound sense of liberation. The noise that once ruled his thoughts was now a distant echo, no longer defining him. The world had not changed, but he had, and that change radiated outward, touching everyone he met. He continued traveling, encountering people burdened by fear, grief, and doubt. He did not force wisdom upon them. He did not preach. He simply existed as an example of what is possible when the mind is emptied, when presence replaces obsession, when clarity triumphs over chaos. Years passed. Ryan's journey led him to mountains, rivers, villages, and cities. He saved lives, healed minds, and calmed hearts, not through magic or power, but through awareness, patience, and the simple yet profound art of letting go. And everywhere he went, people began to understand that the mind need not be a prison. It was the final revelation that defined his legacy. An empty mind does not signify nothingness. It signifies freedom. It signifies clarity. It signifies life fully lived. And as Rayan finally looked upon the mountains from which his journey began, he understood the deepest truth the hermit had ever shown him. To empty your mind is not to escape life. It is to embrace it, fully, freely, without resistance, without fear, without attachment. Only then can life flow through you like a river, unstoppable, infinite, and alive. The story of Rayan ends not in silence but in motion, not in stillness but in awareness, not in having all answers, but in living the questions fully, courageously, and openly. And for every soul who has ever felt trapped by their thoughts, weighed down by doubt, or lost in the noise of life, the lesson is simple. Empty your mind, and you will find your freedom. Empty your mind, and life will begin anew. Empty your mind, and you will finally see yourself as you truly are, limitless, present, alive.